and you just gotta fight for everything.
They are just boring. I was bored, and I was just like, I was making my mom move. It's hard. It's their emotion. I just use the
So I have a few broad questions. Before I get started, is there anything you guys want to preface this conversation with?
I don't know.
You guys are so zen and you're white on the couch. Okay. Well, can you walk us through the conception of this performance piece? I know this is the first project you guys have collaborated on, but you've been looking forward to working together for a while.
Well, Theo and I met not too long ago. We were in a class together called the Crit Lab. Patricia Miranda, I don't know if anyone knows who she is. She runs a professional practice critique group, and we met there this past fall.
And for anyone who's not familiar with Patricia, her piece is actually the red lace piece that's on the wall.
Okay. Am I talking loud enough?
You could talk about it.
Oh, okay. I don't know. It kind of reverberates in here. Anyway, so Theo and I met at that point, and we became familiar with each other's work through that. And I think I responded to Theo's work. If you looked at some of his work on the table, those are some of the things that I saw only online. And also Theo had bravely, I don't know if anyone noticed, we had pins in our arms. That was from Theo's practice. And he had actually done that on the subway. And
sort of a fake wound with lace in it that I put on my hand and walked around the city, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And he had shown pictures of that, and I responded to that. I'm like, whoa. I'm like, if you want to meet and do that, I'll go with you.
Which we haven't actually done
We
that.
haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
And I don't know, what you saw my work, which was kind of more performative and more exterior with large canvases in the world. And that's kind of how we met.
So what was the impetus to do a performance specifically?
You.
I guess, yeah.
I mean, how did you get the open call? How did that come to you? For Terrarium, for this exhibition?
For Terrarium, I think I just found it on Instagram somewhere.
Yeah.
And I guess it was sort of, you responding to me and then sort of like introducing this more performative element that I hadn't experienced before, and sort of blending our work together in that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of kind of what happened to us while we were in that class. And then we both unknowingly, between the two of us, we didn't realize we both submitted our works to this open call. I mean, it was just total random that we both found it. We didn't know each other was doing it. And then we got accepted, both of us, including Patricia. And I think I volunteered to do a performance when I was filling out like what I would do. And so when I spoke with Jenn, that's why I pointed to Jenn, how did this happen? Thanks to you.
And I did not mark that I wanted to do a performance because I was like, I don't know how to do that, and I don't know what that would be, so I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, and you were going to be on a panel.
Yeah. With like 5 other people.
With 5 other people. So when she asked me if I would like do a collaboration, I said absolutely, and I know who it would be with. So so Theo and I, in kind of this.
So that's something I wouldn't have really ever thought to do if Susan hadn't sort of invited me, or if I hadn't been familiar with her work before.
So that's how the collaboration, us two working together, kind of came about.
Can you guys speak about like the considerations that you made with this specific space, how the space affected maybe the choreography of the piece or the materials?
I think it being such a large space played a role in sort of how we paced it out and how we thought about like the actions that we were doing. Mm-hmm. And I think also just a lot of it was, or a lot in the beginning was sort of responding to the people who had shown up and like where people were in the space and stuff like that. So there were a lot of different considerations that came up like in response to the space.
Yeah, I noticed a few times because people don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So
because it looks strange.
Yeah.
When someone comes up to you and.
I think people were just kind of like, I'm just gonna keep looking at the art, and I don't know what
maybe
this
strange version will go away.
Yeah, maybe they'll go away. But so I saw you guys like kind of walk away, but then you decided to come back and like try that person a second time.
Yeah.
And that speaks to transformation, I feel like, because sometimes like the transformation you need doesn't happen the first chance.
You're sort of forcing other
Yeah.
people to transform.
Yeah.
In that case.
To be open to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think an important aspect of the materials, I think that's a very important part of this collaboration. And again, this is something that Theo and I learned about each other's work within this crit lab. I'll speak for myself, but I learned, maybe it was in 2016, when I was in my studio. I had been doing a lot with canvas and lifting it and wrapping it and doing all, like it looked more like what that work looks like, and it was, but I was also lifting and stretching and pulling and pinning, and one day I was poking a pin in the canvas to put it on the wall, and I felt, oh my God, the canvas is my body. So it was kind of an accident, but I realized that this canvas is this representation of my physical, like an extension of my body in the world. So if you were to go on my Instagram or whatever, you would see maybe some videos of me with the wind and things like that. So it allows me to really be in the world in a different way. So the canvas kind of as my body.
Yeah, I think like on a surface level, like a lot of our work doesn't physically resemble each other that much, or like on kind of a cursory glance, they don't look that similar. But there are a lot of elements that are sort of shared in our practices, and one of them is this kind of relationship to the body. Like you're talking about the canvas as an extension of your body. And for me, often, like a lot of my work, not just the lace that was involved in this or that over there, but I often think about the work I'm making as like a skin, whether that's sort of my shed skin or something like that. That's often the case. But they both have this sort of close relationship to our bodies, and sort of maybe an extension of our bodies in some way.
I kind of think that as we worked out conceptually what we were doing, that the relationships of those materials they kind of told us what they kind of wanted to do in a way of coming together and working with those materials.
Yeah. And Theo, you mentioned the idea of skins. Can you also explain a bit about the piece that's in the show? Because
maybe my practice would be more broad.
Yeah.
Because it's, a phrase I use in my artist statement that I often use to explain my work sort of generally is that it has to do with the trans body as a palimpsest. And a palimpsest is like a document that is, the layers have been written and erased over time so that the original traces are still visible under the current writing. So sort of looking at trans experience and like looking at the body through that lens. And so something I think about in relationship to that is, like I said earlier, like my work is sort of a shed skin. And so that's really what that work over there has to do with. I've been thinking about for a while about lace as a shed skin because, lace has this sort of association with garments that are like close to the body and close to the skin. So thinking about the lace, like recording those traces and recording like the history of a person, the history of a person's body through like wrinkles and damage and stains and things of that nature. And so that's what that sort of has to do with, is this shed skin that's recorded the history of the body in some way.
And often on the topic of lace, there are a lot of like ceremonious associations with lace. It seems to be like it's like a high-low material, right? It's like you can have the tablecloth that's made of lace that you only use on holidays, right? Or a bride's veil. So, and parts of the performance also felt like they were maybe referencing historical, traditional types of ceremonies. Was there thought of that when you were choreographing it? Was there an intention to make it feel, at least certain moments, like a ceremony of sorts?
I think that happened kind of
Organically. I don't think we discussed
We didn't discuss
ceremony
that.
so much.
But it seemed that kind of, idea of this interaction that we did and passing, and as sharing with everyone, there is a ceremony in that, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess we weren't thinking so much about formal ceremonies, and honestly, I hadn't thought much about ceremony until you brought it up.
I hadn't
emailed us the questions. But I guess you could think about like ritual or ceremony or something like that as something that's part of life, sort of in a more innocuous way.
Yeah. And also I think, especially at the end, when there's the tying up, right? There's this, or even beforehand when you're pinning the lace to the canvas, there are a lot of these moments of forced or willful joining. And there are a lot of like ceremonies that are centered around the act of two things joining. So it was kind of moving to see the variety of those ways of joining, right? Some of them were a little more playful when you're
Some are fairly violent with the pen.
Exactly.
And some are pretty gentle, like laying the lace on top of the canvas, I think. So sort of playing, I think there is maybe some playing with like the dichotomy between like soft sort of gentleness and like harshness and injuring something.
Susan, maybe we spoke a little bit about Exuvia, which is Theo's piece in the show. Do you also want to give us some context about the piece that you have in the show? Things I leave behind.
Well, this is a work that I was explaining to one of the attendees. I don't know your name.
Ellen.
Ellen, hi. She was asking me about this work because she had read the artist statement, and that's something about I've been preparing for some surgery that I had to have, that I would be out of my studio for a long time. And the work itself, the canvas, has been living in the world. I made that, I think, I made it right before Thanksgiving, 2020. And it lived in the world. It played in the snow, literally, with me. It was like 17 inches of snow, or whatever. I don't know if anyone remembers that big snow in December in 2020. It was fantastic. And it's gone down and been, in the statue of dealing with like the liberty, and it was just a lot of things that I was thinking about at the time, right after the election. So it's really transformed since I originally made it. And when I was getting ready to go to leave my studio for my surgery, I wanted to, which is kind of part of my usual practice, is to leave my studio in a state of anticipation for my return, and also its anticipation for my return, and my anticipation to be what is there waiting for me and what I will be kind of returning to. It's just a thing that I like. And so I don't know exactly how the form happened, but I had it hanging from the ceiling, and I'd done a performance live on Instagram that had nothing to do with this form, with the exception of it hanging exactly like this, but straight. And I do a lot of pulling, and anyone who's seen my work kind of knows that I do a lot of draped things. And I pulled it back and I put it on a hook, and it was just like, oh, and then I pulled the bottom out, and it just has this kind of feeling of a physical, like the way my body might be preparing my body for the surgery that I was going to have, which I would not be able to walk for like 8 weeks. And this is the form that it took, and it seemed a really good place to let it rest and wait for me to come back. And I work with a lot of found material, and I do assemblage, and it was very exciting for me to be able to submit this work. I had taken a picture of it before I left, and I could recreate it here.
Yeah, there's something, I don't know if I want to, if you consider it to be figurative, but there is something sort of like, I kind of view this part that comes out and billows as like, while you were speaking, as like that, and it's just held there. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's really, it feels like a waiting being, a waiting body, and all that tension that's like drawn back that you're speaking about.
Thank you. I think and do what I do, and so when someone has a response that I'm like, oh, that probably is exactly what I was feeling when I did it.
Right.
And it's alive. For me, it's kind of alive like that. And I think Ellen said that she thought of a lung when she saw it. So that's really interesting that you had that. But it's like this kind of thing with the body where the body this can do what I can't do in a way.
It seems like both of you, well, Theo more with this specific piece in the show, but both of you are kind of dealing with the grid sometimes. Like Susan, you have very structured binding that happens with these bundles, and even in the paintings that are hanging in the studio there, previous works that you have, there's some grids that show up on these organic forms that you're making too. Is that something conscious that you're always, how does the grid kind of interact? And I guess you could expand that to be geometric forms too if you want.
I don't know. I love the grid. It's just, it's an organizing structure. There's something settling about a grid. And the grid is everywhere. Like a couple of summers ago, I was running. I'm like, oh my God, the grid is everywhere. Everything is a grid. I got really into it. As far as how it came into the work, again, it's an organizing structure, but I had been making some work for a solo show I had back in I started in 2017. The show was in 2018, 2019. But I was creating these folded, big, huge canvases, 12 by 18 feet, and folding them up and folding them up and folding them up, and using that as a way to mark make, essentially. And I would stuff things in them and then put them in the die for a few days, and then I would open them up, and there would be a grid. And I can't say that I said, oh, I'm going to make a grid, but it sort of became part of what was important for me in the work, and then all kinds of other forms show up within that. So for me, it's like an organizing structure, and it's a very comforting, I don't know what word to use, form, yeah. And these bundles, and they're very, they can be heavy and big, and they can be small and easily transportable.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about the body. I'm curious how you guys consider the viewer's body, if at all, when they're looking at either your still work or this performance.
I usually just think about me.
Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of where I kind of think that's where, for me, where it starts and where it enters the world, and like a viewer would have an experience is when they experience the work out in the world.
I think part of doing this that was different from what I've done in the past is sort of the way we sort of gradually involved people more and more into it. Because our original plan didn't involve other people handling the bundles or anything like that. But yeah, I guess I don't normally consider other people. That's my
Is narrative important in your work at all?
I think in my work, I think about like a story or like history or like implying something has happened less than like a structured narrative of like beginning, middle, and end. So there is
evidence,
some idea of something having happened, but less, a concrete story that makes like some kind of linear sense.
Yeah.
I would kind of agree with that. I have things in my mind that I'm working on, that I'm thinking about, and that goes into the work. But then when it lives outside of me, that narrative or that story that I told myself isn't necessary to read somewhere or know. And I found it not necessary, but then this kind of open conversation that you can have with people who then experience your work, that's the opportunity then to talk more about and learn about something, learn maybe something that I didn't even think about when someone else sees.
There's a lot of references or actions that imply harm or injury in the work, and I want to know, is your work healing for you?
I wouldn't say it's a goal for me, but I think maybe that happens by making it in some way. I wouldn't say that it's sort of, my work has a lot to do with this sort of back and forth between beautiful and sort of repulsive elements. And that to me sort of represents like injury and healing. So I guess, healing is a theme in the work, and maybe it is healing in some way too. But it's sort of a complicated element of the work, so it's hard to say exactly.
Healing for me was never a part of like, okay, I want to make work so I can heal something. But making, like creating something, it does that without even, I don't know how many people here are artists. I know several artists here, and I think they might say the same thing about their own process, is that it's not maybe the intention, but it's a result, personal result, which is only, for you. And I also, when I was kind of a younger artist back in 2016 and starting to, work with found material and things like that, I would pick up things and think, oof, I could like stick someone with this, or I could stick myself, or I could hit someone with, I know that sounds kind of violent, but I was a little scared of it myself, because I didn't really kind of, I had to accept the fact that I could have that kind of a that was part of it. But then I worked with light, like the gels, and it's like, oh my God, this is just like, kind of, being in and I don't go to church, but being in a church and this kind of joy. So there's these oppositional, but they go together. You can't just have one without the other. And I have found over the last 2 years, as I've had my work out in public a lot, I did it all for me. The pandemic, I got to go outside and I made my work outside, and I did that so I could be safe. That was sort of something I did do. And I learned more about my work and, things through that. But I found when the world came back a little bit and people were out and they experienced my work, they would share with me their sort of literally a couple people, transformative experiences they had. They saw the world in a way they hadn't seen it before. So I don't intend that, but it's happened. So it's been really good that way.
Like, I know that Susan goes out and with her canvases into the world, but Theo, you said you would go out with the pins on your body, like on the subway. Could you elaborate?
I've been working a lot with like liquid latex, which if you don't know what that is, it's used a lot for like, make like fake wounds for costumes and stuff like that. So I made this sort of like wound and lace like composition that sort of looks like my work, but I like had it stuck on my hand, like made it on my skin and left it there. And then I just went and sort of walked around the city with that on my hand, and I took the subway around and stuff like that.
And the pins were there too?
There were pins and like some kind of bloody looking stuff.
And what was the reaction you were getting?
People, I guess, made an effort to pretend that they didn't see me, but also like really avoided me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I noticed them on your arms when you guys came out. So you both came out with these ethereal angels, like all in white, and carrying your bundles. And then when you came up, you had these pins, and it scared me. Like that looked really like a wound. It really did.
If you look on my Instagram, you can see more about that.
Yeah, but it totally stood out to me. That I thought it was part of your thing. Not that you were going to use the pins later, but like that it was supposed to be this wound in this like clean space, but it was noticeable, So that, and then when you laid everything out and then you took the pins and then pinned your pieces together, you were just talking a few minutes ago about like a wound and healing. It's like you took the wounds, but then you guys are healing each other by like pinning it together. So I don't know, was that an intention? Did you want us to see them as a wound, or was it just that you needed to, have the pins with you to do that part of the
think it was a combination of like, we needed functionally a way to carry them.
Right.
But also like, that was a way of sort of tying it into my work somewhat in a way.
Right. But it came from
So I
something.
think that's a really good, like, sort of connection.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it just really, taking them, like the pins off your body and then putting them together and putting your pieces together and then shaking them, and like moving them and like hitting the ground with them. And it made like this great sound. And it was obviously extremely heavy. And it just felt like very cathartic and felt very like you guys were going through something doing this, you know what I mean? And it resonated, I think, very much.
One of the questions I had on my list was about like how important it was for a performance like this to be a collaboration and not a solo performance, because like Alexi was saying, there's a lot of transference is really important. Whether that's a painful transference or a relieving transference, there's a lot of like acts of merging.
Yeah, I think that's the fact that it was a collaboration was sort of central to like the subject matter of the work or to like the theme of what we were doing.
I don't think, I don't think I would have conceptually come up with that kind of an idea without collaborating with Theo specifically. Us doing it together is kind of what made it work.
It's really sort of about our work coming together in a way.
Yeah.
So that really shaped like what happened, really.
Yeah.
When you guys were handing it over, it was a literal exchange, but I also I felt grateful. And handing it back, was there any intention behind maybe exchanging energy or just thoughts? And then at the end there was also you two becoming a union. You were kind of talking about merging a little bit, and there was a union of both of you guys, through kind of spinning into each other, and also the fabric you're using. I guess my question is am I catching on? Am I picking up what you're putting down?
Well, the title of our work is Convective Currents.
I'm sorry.
Convective currents, and if you look up the definition of that is an exchange of energy. So
you got it.
Actually, talking about those themes, can you talk to us a bit about the idea behind the braiding moment? When you both leave the fabrics and you go over, you take the strings that were holding the fabrics neatly and you go over and together are braiding it onto the cage wall before unfolding the fabrics. What was kind of how does that fit into these themes?
I guess one aspect of it is, it's there's a range of different kinds of joining things, the violence of the pins or the gently laying the lace on top of the canvas, or the braiding is another way, of intertwining or bringing two things together or joining things, I guess.
Through labor.
yeah, no, I think so. I mean, it's interesting because we have not had anyone but ourselves doing this together, and I think our instincts to do what we did came as we were working together in the space, just ourselves, and so that particular little kind of quiet moment, it felt like the way to, I'm using the word honor, but to kind of join these things and have them kind of be together, and not just be these things that are put off to the side.
So that every element comes together.
Yes, every element is important, and it's important.
Yeah, and that was also the only moment when you weren't carrying the weight of your fabric bundles too. So it was nice to have that set aside. It was more like a playful action.
And shaping, and you said you base a lot of your work on that. Do you think that this is kind of also tied into that, or?
I think pretty much everything in my practice is in some way informed by that. So I think that's a really good question. Transformation has been and transition and gender transition specifically has been something that's really important in my work for a long time. So I think it would be impossible for me to make something and that to not be in there. So I think that's very perceptive, actually. So for me, that plays into everything that I make, really.
Are there any specific parts of the performance that maybe you could point out as being like you're identifying that the most with? It's okay.
I mean, I don't know if I would point to a specific moment, because it's more about like the process or something kind of transient, something becoming something else rather than like a specific moment or like a specific image or something.
Yeah. And I'm, in this concept of transformation, I see just like living life for me kind of as this, I'm kind of intensely aware of transformation of, through time and of the growing older and just a variety of things that it's been interesting to me for quite a while just as the works start out one way and they become transformed. And again, through that process, I experience my transformation in a way that I might not just walking around in the world. And then this experience with the two of us. Yeah, it was. It felt like that. It felt like that to me.
Yeah, and I guess we both bring like different sort of individual experiences of transformation to it from our own lives.
Yeah.
Before we close, is there anything you guys want to mention?
I mean, I have kind of came out of nowhere this a couple weeks ago. I'm doing an installation that's opening on Thursday down in, I don't know, it's a school that's part of a church on Washington Street, not right off 6th Avenue. And I don't even know the title of it. It came together, so I'm not the curator, but I'm putting 3 works in it and a video. Actually, that work will be in it, that blue piece, as it is. But and I'll have like a 12-minute video in that and 2 other works. And it's more related to the 2 years, the year social practice.
Anything we should look out for? I mean, you always post on your Instagram.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of in a like working on stuff and planning phase at the moment, so I don't know. But you can follow my Instagram and find out about it, I guess.
Well, thank you everybody so much.